So welcome everyone. I am Nicole McLean, the head of growth marketing here at Composely. And we're so excited to have you today for our webinar on how to efficiently scale content with outsourced resources. We have an amazing panelist that we've assembled. We were going over the name pronunciation, so hopefully I get everything correct. But fellow composer Ashley Strohsnyder. Wow, that was harder than I thought. Who is our head of editorial, Corey Kirk, who is the head marketing and communication manager at Resourcing Edge, as well as JC Schreckengast, who is the content marketing specialist at QuickFrame by Mountain, and so excited to have them. Before we get started, going to go through just a few admin points. So everyone in the audience is on auto mute. The chat is live. Please feel free to use it as well as the Q&A feature. I'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the webinar, and we're going to try and hold about 5 to 10 minutes at the end for any additional questions that you guys might have. We are recording the webinar, so you can expect a copy of this in your inbox by tomorrow, and please feel free to share it with your team or refer back to it. And then I always, since the post-COVID era, like to ask for a little grace. Many of us are working from home. My fire alarm went off this morning, so you never know what's going to happen. Just know that if something goes wrong, we're all prepared to troubleshoot, and we'll get back to the content as soon as possible, but you just have to be more flexible nowadays. And so with that, instead of reading all of these fantastic people's bios, because they are indeed fantastic, you can read it on the website, but I asked each person to share their marketing or writing pet peeve. So as I said, Ashley is our head of editorial and a fellow composer here at Composely. And for her, the biggest marketing pet peeve is just a lack of consistency in tone, in design. You use different colors, you capitalize things some places and don't in other places. I know I've gotten a few slacks of Nicole, you're not being consistent. And I love that she keeps me accountable. We love good accountability. So Ashley, welcome. So excited to have you on the panel today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. Next is Corey. And we're actually going to talk about this topic a little bit later. So it worked really well. But when we were asking him about his pet peeve, it's that, well, you can just do it, right? You can write. Everyone can write. Everyone knows how to write. You can just do that. We don't need to put resources behind it or find, you can just do it. So excited to hear you expand a little bit more on that later.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then finally, JC, which is, we just got to love it, is not using the Oxford comma and also potentially using it inconsistently. So put in the chat, let me know, are you team Oxford comma or not team Oxford comma? I have to say I am team Oxford comma. So I'm with you, JC.
I appreciate it. I'm really excited to see the chat. All right. We've already got one for sure. I love it. Thank you.
Oh, Andrea.
Oh no.
Okay. We still love and support you. We are very inclusive here. Both Oxford and non-Oxford can live in harmony. Awesome. All right. Well, to kick us off, I do have just a quick poll that I'm going to launch. And really just curious to see, for the folks on the call, are you guys currently using outsourced vendors, partners, freelancers in your resourcing strategies today? And it doesn't just have to be in marketing. I'm just curious if that's something that, as you're building out your marketing team or whatever team you sit on, are you guys using this? So I'll let this run for maybe another 10, 15 seconds and share, but spoiler alert, it does look like most are using, but there is a higher percentage than I expected. So about 40% of you guys say that you're not currently using any outsourced resourcing in your strategy. So we'll love to understand. We'll chat more on, if that's the right thing. And I know Ashley has some really good tips on knowing whether or not outsourcing is the right fit. So we'll definitely talk about that. But to get us started, I want to make sure, there we go, stop sharing. All right, so Corey is going to get us started here. But I'm curious, first and foremost, I want to hear a little bit about how you think about budgeting, resource planning, and how you think on how outsourcing works into that and kind of build a holistic strategy for the year.
Yeah, so when it comes to budgeting for really any kind of content needs that you have. It's important to kind of look at your entire calendar for example, I look clear out to a year. So I look at what I need as far as what I personally need to help me with my marketing. And then I kind of work that into, okay, I need this. So now I'm going to kind of set aside a certain amount of money for the year. And it doesn't have to be like an exact number, but it needs to, you need to kind of cover the budgetary needs of wherever you're working for. And there might be some, emergency content things that you need. I think we've all probably ran into that. And so you need the budget for that to handle those kind of things. Yeah, Resourcing Edge, we do our budgets at the end of the year, and it's throughout all of the next year. So and as as far as the outsourcing, we really just look at where we need the outsourcing the most. It's kind of pretty simple, and then we just budget accordingly. So.
And where do you, like, when you're trying to decide, is outsourcing just, oh, this is clearly an outsourced function, or do you ever have to grapple with, we should bring this in-house, no, outsourcing is the right thing because of XYZ reasons?
Yeah, so our marketing team is fairly large. It's I want to say at least 50 people, and so there's a lot of moving pieces in our department. And what we really look at is what don't we have, and where do we need that extra help, because we have content writers, we have SEO people, we have all the different functions of marketing, but sometimes you just need that little extra push in certain directions to help you, because the amount of work can get overwhelming if you don't have the extra set of hands to help you. And we love going with outsourcing just because it frees us up to do more of the internal processes and internal marketing, and then we can kind of outsource our more customer facing marketing, which helps us out a lot. So
absolutely. JC, I'm curious, how do you kind of fit in to, since you really own the content side of things, what does that budgeting and planning process look like for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think we really just try to focus on exactly what Corey said, what we need for the year, really what our customers want to know, how much content can we get out that's going to be helpful, and how much content can we get out that's, what are our content pieces that are driving the most revenue? So I think really focusing on those hard hitting pieces, the ones that people come back to again and again. Really focusing on those and getting budget behind those and building up those different areas as well. But yeah, I think just focusing on really the most important aspects, and then spending any extra on more want to haves rather than need to haves.
For sure. And I'm going a little off script here, but I'm curious, content is one of those things that can be a little harder to attribute. It's more of everyone hates this word, but like more of an influenced source. It touches all parts of the funnel. So when you think about trying to tie and to identify what are those need to have pieces, what are some of those maybe metrics or things that you use to kind of show the value of what you're creating?
Yeah.
Or JC.
Oh, sorry.
No, please go for it.
We work a lot with our SEO team and our, other functions in our marketing team, just to make sure we are, hitting those most important pieces. We work with SEO all the time, just to gather which pieces are, landing us at the top of search engines, seeing where we have ability to grow a little bit more. And really just creating more content around those keywords, really focusing in on that. And then, of course, Google Analytics helps us a ton with with letting us know where we're standing and page views and all of that fun stuff. But we really just keep an eye on that and, try to keep growing our most popular pieces and then build up any that have potential.
Awesome. That's great. Ashley, anything that you'd add before we move on?
I think JC was touching on something really smart there about starting with the goals, like what you're trying to drive, what you're trying to achieve. Because particularly when you're doing planning, you can start with, well, what can I afford, right? And that limits you pretty immediately. You can start with your dream production calendar and then ask, well, what would it take to achieve this? If you're looking at driving results, growing, scaling. So that's kind of a way to work backwards. And, that helps you kind of weed out the must-haves from the need to have, like, this is clearly one of our drivers and we have to prioritize it. Wouldn't it be cool to also build this? We don't really have enough time. Well, can we make it smaller? Could we hire? Could we outsource? You start asking those questions about how to make it happen, kind of working backwards.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Okay, so now we're getting to Corey's pet peeve. So really excited for this question, but we all have heard, especially as marketers or even just people, it's like, you went to college, you know how to write, like you can just do it and it's fine. Or even I think sometimes we take that on ourselves. We're like, oh, if I have to work with a freelancer, I'm going to have to edit and explain things, like I'll just do it myself. It'll be faster. But obviously that comes at a cost. And so I'm curious, how do you go about making that business case or even checking yourself? And Corey, you said this really well earlier of sometimes outsourcing allows you to focus on other things. Like, how do you take a step back and say, is this really the right person or resource to be spending time on this and make that business case? So Corey or JC, whoever wants to dig in first.
Yeah, I guess I'll start. So
it is your pet peeve, so I wanted to give you the opportunity to air your grievance.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I think a lot of business people and people who aren't necessarily writers themselves kind of look at content as, sometimes they look at it as an afterthought, sometimes they're very aware of it. But for me, it's about what kind of value can I bring to the business whenever I'm planning all my marketing things. And content is usually at the forefront of that for me, because if you don't have quality content and things that are going in front of your customers, you can't really bring them on that buyer's journey very successfully. Kind of to touch on sales a little bit, if the content isn't there to give to your customers and to kind of educate them and help them along that journey, your company's not going to make money at the end of the day. And that's what a company is supposed to do. So it's highly important to have very, good quality content. And I think people who aren't writers don't understand that there are certain things you need to do in order to produce quality written copy and quality brochures, white papers, anything that you can think of. And so it's not just as simple as saying, English, just write something. You have to know your audience, you have to know your target, you have to know what you're trying to accomplish with the content before you can really spend any time creating it. And so that's something that I take very seriously. And so that's kind of what I focus on. So
awesome. Yeah, JC, I'd love to hear from you as well on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, Nicole, you brought up a great point, and Corey, you touched on it again. Content touches every part of the sales and marketing funnels. Content is in every aspect of the marketing and sales process. And it's really, it really is vital. You know, when people think of it, maybe they do think of a blog or, you know, a white paper right away. And sure, it is that. But at the same time, it's so much more than that. And so much more goes into that. You know, creating a piece of content. Like I said, we work with SEO, we work with customer service, we work with all of these other functions of the business to create quality, meaningful content that actually, you know, resonates with our audience. You know, and if we're just throwing spaghetti against the wall and hoping it sticks, we're really not doing anything to drive the business. We're really not providing quality content. And at some point, customers are going to go, why am I here? Why am I looking at this? It's not valuable to me. So I think something really important, especially now when we have so much content everywhere, is really creating something of quality and of, you know, that your audience resonates with or needs to know. I think those are really big key drivers right now.
I'm muted. With that, I'm curious. We've touched on the subject of content does touch every part of the funnel. It takes more time than we think. So what are examples of content that maybe is more easily outsourced versus examples that are better for in-house because you need that context and to go talk to all those team members? And Ashley, I'm sure someone who manages an editorial team has been a freelance yourself. I'm really curious what your opinion is here.
Yeah, so I think when we're talking about, you know, what to outsource versus what to keep in-house, it depends both on what kind of content we're talking about and also what kind of outsourcing we're talking about. Like, you know, we're talking about maybe hiring another internal editor or, you know, hiring a freelancer. That's one conversation. If you're talking about hiring, you know, an entire marketing team or bringing in a branding consultant for, you know, a brief contract, you know. So I think there's different ways to think about outsourcing too. So just generally speaking, if we're talking about general content, kind of my rule of thumb is that if it's not something you can clearly articulate, like you're telling your mom or somebody's grandma, like if you can't explain it well, then you're probably not ready to outsource it. So I think about things like, you know, should I get a freelancer to write the About Us page for my business? Probably not, because that person isn't going to have, you know, the familiarity, the know-how. By the time I type up all the notes that they're going to need to do the piece, then I've basically already written it. So, you know, I think about things like that. And not that you need to know everything that goes into a piece, because that's what research is for, but like you need to know enough to be able to clearly articulate what you're asking for, you know, so you can give someone direction and they can take it, run with it, flesh it out, and bring something back to you that meshes with the vision that you had that you just didn't have time to sit down and write it all yourself, you know. So like 10 tips for writing great freelance content. Like, can a freelance writer probably write that? Yeah, go for it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about like who my target audience is and what action I want them to take at the end of the blog post, and then like give me 10 things, write it well, doable in a way that, you know, some bigger projects, things that are a little more brand focused. If you've got a really specific kind of B2B angle, then, you know, maybe someone external doesn't have the insight and context they would need to do that well.
Yeah, I sometimes feel like consultants, freelancers are almost like business therapists because they shine a light on the thing you try to sweep under the rug. Like, I kind of know our target market. I kind of know our tone. I can handle it. And then you go to try to work a freelancer. It's like, well, does everyone agree with this? Who are your stakeholders? What's your process? Can you articulate? And it's like, no, I can't, but I should, and I will. And it really forces you to do so. I'm curious, Corey and JC, from your experiences, does that hold up? You know, are there things that you found like, no, actually outsourcing this works really well, or it doesn't?
Yeah. So at Resourcing Edge, yeah, we're very business to business. So being able to outsource more of the direct to consumer things is a big help for us, because we spend a lot of our time doing the business to business, talking to shareholders and all these different people. So being able to kind of just relieve the pain point, not really pain point, but that section to outsourcing is a real help for us. So.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually flip it a little bit. We outsource a lot of our B2B content and then write a lot of our D2C content. So always love that. But yeah, we have basically two different audiences here at QuickFrame. We have, the businesses that we're working with to create video, and we have our creators. So it really just comes down to what the content is about, who we're targeting. But yeah, absolutely. I think that's always such a good light when, someone comes in and goes, oh, well, hey, I need this piece of information. And you're like, oh no. How, it makes you reevaluate and really dig a little bit deeper into your own content strategy, and, really helps yourself out in the long run.
Absolutely. And so there definitely are benefits of the in-house side. And we talked about, again, JC, I love how you talked about working with different stakeholders across departments and really being able to maybe find that SME or when you need it. But what are some of the benefits of outsourcing? We've touched on it a little bit, but just to really call them out, and Corey, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so the biggest benefit for me personally, and I think for a lot of people, is just it helps you kind of shore up the weaknesses of what you need. Maybe the things that you either can't do all the time. Maybe they take up time, and that's pretty much the main thing, right? Is that if they take up a lot of time, but you still need it, well, it gives you time. And I mean, time is pretty much the most valuable resource, in my opinion, that you can have. And so for me, outsourcing kind of creates a way for me to spend my time where I need to pay attention, and I can hand off something that I still need done, but I don't necessarily have the time to do. So that's probably the biggest thing for me.
Yeah, and time's money, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're talking about, resources that it takes to do these things. And I think about that too, just the scale of production. Everyone's always trying to grow, drive revenue. We're not always trying to create more and more content, but it can feel like that. So for me, like, okay, I can spend however long it takes me to write one blog post, or I can take that time, write outlines for 6 and pass them over. And then I've got a longer tail and a bigger machine turning than if I were just trying to do it all myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the biggest driver for us as well. Even just recently, it's spending, being able to outsource and spending more time internally has really allowed us to take on, several different projects and, help our creator team on the creator side at QuickFrame. And it's really allowed us to take on a lot more just by freeing up our time.
Absolutely. I think one of the things we talked about during our prep too is the flexibility that you can get, which really comes back to time. You have more flexibility with your time, but also I think harder flexibility with like actual budget and knowing where you put that and not being so locked in. So the thing, we got this question from people submitting during registration as well, but it's outsourcing sounds great and there are these benefits, but how do you do that well, specifically with content or even design where quality can be subjective? How do you do that without losing that? And so Ashley, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this because it's what you do every day, but what are some things that you think a company needs to have in place in order to make their partner successful?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's the foundational question. If you're looking to outsource, like you need a little bit of time to organize yourself, but I think to look more broadly at it, there's this truism that like your inputs determine your output, and to get good results, you should focus more on the input than the output. And so I think of that when we're talking about, outsourcing as a way to free up time. You're freeing up time to be strategic. So I think to be a good partner, to the people who you're going to hand things over to, be a good partner to your outsourced teammates, is really focusing on making sure you're setting them up for success. So I do spend a lot of my time day in and day out looking at this question, and some of it comes down to like coaching brands on what should be in the guidelines. Did you tell the writer you wanted that? Well, let's take it. How do we take it out of your head and put it into the creative brief you're giving to someone else? And I think, this applies to design too. It's tricky to outsource when you want a really iterative process where you'll know it when you see it, because it's really hard for, a writer or a designer to guess right, so we look at questions like, what's a reasonable target word length for something with 12 subheads? Is it 500 words? Like, probably not. If the piece you're trying to outrank is 6,000 words long, do you want to try to outrank them in a shorter and sweeter version? Is that going to be meaty enough to satisfy you? So, we ask questions like that. And then I think the other half of it to me really comes down to the brief itself, what's in there and what documentation you're able to provide people, because you do not want to handhold your freelancers, your contractors. You want to be able to give them what they need to succeed and say, thank you, this is pretty good when it comes back. So to ensure that kind of quality and consistency, particularly if it's at scale, if we're talking about one blog, maybe you can work with somebody, but if you're trying to do 10 this week, okay, is that 2 different writers? Is that 10 different writers? Let's make a style sheet. If you don't have one, it's going to be a real challenge to get brand voice, to get that consistency and that quality of the end product, things like that, really nailing down who's your target audience. Let's get this in a nutshell. How should I, the writer, be speaking to them? Am I going to be really technical, pretty casual? How are we going to handle sourcing? Let's make those decisions up front, and then pass those over to the freelancers so that they kind of have some guardrails. And then what you're going to get, even if the first draft, this is the first time you're working with somebody, hey, it's not perfect, but this is in the zone. So let's refine it. And the iteration process there is much less painful than if you're just, throwing spaghetti, like JC said.
We were all nodding vigorously because I feel like we've been there before. But Corey and JC, what have you found to be successful when you've worked with third parties? JC, I'll let you start this time.
I saw we both went off mute at the same time and I was like, oh no. But yeah, I think it's really a lot of what Ashley said. It's really providing key quality information and trusting the writer, and we've been working with, I almost said QuickFrame, obviously. We've been working with Composely, for quite a while now. And, we absolutely have that knowledge that when we send something out, we know we're going to get something good back. And I think just having that partnership is so valuable because, at this point, frankly, we don't have to worry about it. But, of course, at the beginning, it's so critical to provide those key details and, provide that information about your business, about, who you're reaching. Because, yeah, if you don't provide something, the writer has to do their best to guess, and that can turn into a seemingly negative experience when really it was just a lack of resources and a lack of information.
Well, and I'm sure at QuickFrame too, when you're doing video, I'm sure a lot of us have commissioned video. You can't just go back and refilm something like that. Could cost thousands of dollars. That if you don't have a really good upfront plan and actually the storyboard and what shots you need, not to downplay writing, because writing is also a pain in the butt, but it doesn't necessarily cost you thousands of dollars to go back to rewrite something like it does to have to go reshoot something and capture something that doesn't exist. So I'm sure you guys experienced that as well.
Yes, absolutely. We are very, very, very strong proponents of the creative brief and the quality creative brief.
I think that might be a good next webinar, like how to build a good brief, like really build a good brief. Corey, what about you?
Yeah, a lot of it is pretty much the same as what JC and Ashley have said. I mean, half the battle of working with a third party is the planning. Just making sure that you're setting them up to be able to, write or shoot or whatever. That they have enough so that they can produce something that's quality. Yeah, so like for me, we've been working with Composely for over a year at least, and I always try to make sure that the writers have everything they could possibly need if they have a question while they're researching or writing something, that it's just right there for them. So yeah, I think it's exactly what both JC and Ashley said. So
That's awesome. And I think this is also one of the really hard things when finding the right partner is to point the planning process, the almost education process can take some time. And so JC, maybe if you kick us off, because I know you guys probably experienced this at QuickFrame too. How much time do you give saying, oh, we're just getting to know each other versus, oh no, this might not actually be the right fit? And what's that good balance?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think there's, I don't think there's really a magic number. I would love to be able to say, oh, in, 2 weeks, if it's not working, it's not it. But I think it's much more of a process and finding out if, the writer can really take the brand voice and run with it and really take the audience and run with it and create meaningful content for them. So, I mean, I definitely think it's, it definitely depends on your situation. If you're asking someone to build everything from scratch, it's going to take a lot longer. If you're asking someone to start from, a ton of resources, it's probably not going to take as long to figure out, oh, hey, is this, just a learning curve, or is this really just not a great fit? So I think it really just depends. And, like we've talked about, it's such a two-way street. You have to assess what you're giving the writer as well. Just because if you're not, if you don't have a lot of resources, the writer might be fine with that, but also super important to give them grace periods during that time and really allowing them to take over and, create what they need to create to really get started.
Ashley, I'm curious from your perspective, on both sides, but like, do you ever get a feeling as a freelancer trying to do work of like, oh, we're probably not the right fit? Like we're dating. It's like, oh, we're on a third date and it's not, there are just some mismatches in values here. And like, what are some signs that maybe that's happening?
Yeah, and it does happen, and it's not always same as dating. It's not always because somebody's wrong. I think the things to look at have to do with kind of where the misalignments are. Are they, like, if you were dating, are these like core values to you that don't align? So in content, I think the core values are like, okay, is the content here, this was thoroughly researched, I'm impressed, but the brand voice is way off, so I'm willing to give her another shot to see if she can, I'm going to point out how I would have said it, or well, the Composely way of saying it is a little more like this, and then let her try again and see if we can get there. Basically, whether it's the differences are negotiable. Can we bridge that gap? And I spend a lot of time doing that in-house at Composely, because what I'm doing is like building the teams for the brands. So I kind of have to know, who's really good at brand voice, and, which client really just wants something voicey, relatable, kind of fun. They don't typically need a lot of in-depth research because this is a more, topical interest piece, versus who needs something really pretty technical and there's less room for voice here, because maybe my writer who's like a wizard at, she's got the best voice and the best style, like might not fit this client because they don't want that. They just want, really hard hitting in-depth research. So you kind of have to negotiate. And I think, yeah, to answer your question directly, Nicole, is like, sometimes it's not a fit, and you just have to figure out whether the problems are deal breakers or whether they're coachable, negotiable.
Corey, have you experienced some of this and kind of trying to find the right fit for Resourcing Edge?
Yeah. Like Ashley said, I mean, sometimes it's just not, that's just not, you're like, it's not you, it's not me, it's just not working, and so yeah, I think a lot of that is finding if are they compatible with your brand voice, or are they, is this what you're looking for, and if not, are these issues something that we can work on, and maybe over the course of a little bit of time you can overcome those. But as we all know, sometimes you don't have that time to work on your relationship, so you just have to say sorry. But yeah, it's a process like anything, really.
It is. And I think sometimes, as managers, you are very cognizant about how you give feedback to your employees and thinking about their long-term development. And sometimes our freelancers or our third-party folks are like, well, we're outsourcing to you for a reason. You're supposed to be the expert. Like, we are supposed to be saving time. And sometimes I think we shortchange them really good feedback. And so, Ashley, I do want to dive into this with you, but I think just to cover off on this piece of do you need to fit? I've kind of found that it's similar to how I would handle it even with an in-house employee. Like, if I feel like I've given really clear, direct feedback, I've taken the time to coach, and we're still not hitting the mark, I've learned, if anyone's a manager on the call, like, when you have to fire someone, I feel like that's really when you learn how to be a manager, because it teaches you to have those hard conversations and provide really good, clear, actionable feedback to prevent ever having to get to that point. And so I think it's kind of the same thing with your freelancers, or you don't want to go have to find a new one. You don't want to go date again. You don't have to get back on the app and swipe. Like, it's so annoying. You don't want to do that in your freelance life either. And so I think if you feel like you've given all of the actionable, coachable feedback and you're still not missing the mark, like you said, JC, that's 2 weeks, that's a week, that's a year. It does depend on what that freelance looks like. But I feel like that's probably the time when you need to say, like, okay, we need to just part ways amicably and find something else. But to that point, Ashley, can you coach us on how to give really great feedback? Give us some feedback on how to give feedback.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think some of it comes down to the two-way streetness of this, and the, wanting to really rely on strong communication and build trust, because you have to trust a freelancer if you're handing your stuff over, but they kind of need to trust you too. It can be really difficult to be a freelancer and just somebody's like, didn't like it, never hiring you again. And you're like, dang, why? So I think like taking the time from the beginning to try to establish a good rapport, especially in the very beginning, because what we see pretty often is the first batch of projects that we do with a new client. I can put my best writers on this team, but the first batch is not going to be perfect. She might write perfect projects for I don't know, for QuickFrame, because she's been doing it for a while, but on this new brand, she doesn't know them yet, so we see a lot more revisions, and we tell our clients to expect more revisions in that first round. And that's the time for you to share with us and for us to kind of mutually figure out where those missing pieces are. Was it something that the writer overlooked and maybe we should move it higher up in the guidelines? Was it something that was missing? Was it something we need to emphasize, or a nuance we need to spell out? When you say be friendly and be relatable, we thought you meant use contradiction or not contractions. You don't want contractions? Okay, like that is a contradiction. So, the small things you have to just figure out as you go. So I think, in terms of how to give real specific, actionable feedback, the more specific, the better, and the more generous, the better. I think, generosity of time is something that freelancers really appreciate, and I think is kind of built into this ecosystem. But if it's clear to me, say I'm the writer, that somebody really took time to give me good comments on this, I'm going to feel grateful, and I'm going to reciprocate that time in trying to do better. And I think it's a big ask, because you're outsourcing because you don't have time, but I think on both sides too, if you think just bring a generous mindset to the process of giving feedback. Hey, I'm going to assume best intentions. I'm not going to assume the writer's trying to jip me or cheat this, and that's why we did a bad job. I'm going to assume that they tried their best, and it just didn't hit. So let's figure out where we go from here. I'm going to point out this, I'm going to point out that. The more specific, the better. And I do think there comes a time too where, hey, we've tried 3 drafts. It's time to really talk about this. Like, something is broken beyond just the writer not trying or me not communicating. So there are times when you need a higher level conversation with your partner, I think. But yeah, I just think coming at it with generosity really makes a big difference.
Well, I think this happens in design all the time, but the feedback of, well, just make it pop. Like, I want it to feel poppy. I was talking to a content creator earlier and she's like, yeah, like make it sexy. I want it to like feel sexy. And it's like, what does that mean? Like, what do you want me to do with that? I don't know. JC, I'm curious how you guys at QuickFrame or like how you manage the process. Cause I think one thing that can often get into the way of this is having multiple stakeholders. And sometimes those stakeholders disagree, or you get feedback from one and you do it. And then you're like, oh, but I need the CEO to look over it. And I need the customer team to look over it or whatever. And now you're like, we're 8 drafts deep and we should have done this. Like, how do you kind of manage that internally?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really easy to let that get away from you. I think it's, because you want everyone to find it valuable, but at the same time, by the time it gets back from having 8 drafts, it sounds completely incoherent. And, then it'll come back and you get criticism on, oh, well, it's just not in our voice. Like, of course not. It's in these 8 people's voices. So I think it's really easy to let that get away from you. But at the same time, I really think going back to having those basics, having that style guide, having that tone guide, having your voice down, really understanding who your brand is. That way, when you can go back to someone and go, hey, I value this feedback, and, maybe we can implement this in a different way, in a new piece of content. And, trying to make everybody have, make the best of both worlds and really make the content valuable for everyone. But I think following those guidelines is really just key of making it streamlined, and also just not spending way too much time on something that is, yes, important, but not the most important thing in the world. So I think, it's always, in my opinion, so much better to get, 3 great pieces of content out there rather than waiting on that one perfect one, because it doesn't exist.
It's so true. And that's actually, go ahead, Ashley.
Oh, sorry. No, one thing JC said that just clicked with me that I should have mentioned, we were talking about like actual actionable tips. One thing that I find really helpful when I'm trying to train writers and editors is I have 2 monitors. You don't need 2 monitors, but a split screen. What were the guidelines? Let's look at the brief and the content side by side. And if I can figure out where it's not meshing, I can point them to like, see this line here, or that's an aha moment for me where, shoot, I thought I asked for that, but I sure didn't, and then maybe the writer's willing to do it anyway in revision, or maybe we need to renegotiate, and I think the other thing JC said just now was like not spending an insane amount of time. I was talking about being generous with your time, but by the same token, there are ways to streamline your feedback. You don't have to rewrite the whole thing. If I need to tell this writer the tone's off, I'm going to tweak this paragraph and be like, here's kind of the tone I'm going for. This is the type of language we would use. Try to do the rest of it more like this, and finding ways to balance that out can be really useful too. You can give somebody a really useful high level piece of feedback and then ask them to take it and run with it, and they should do it. You shouldn't have to micromanage them. If you give them that key, then okay, I'm going to tweak the rest accordingly.
Absolutely. And I think part of this was actually an audience submitted question, but it's pretty straightforward. But how do you ensure that you're getting quality service on a limited budget? And Corey, I'm curious, like, how have you kind of either what are some of the criteria you look for to balance that, especially as you're leading your budget? You know, how do you make sure that quality is still there?
Yeah, well, I know I'm going to have to use Composely as an example. Okay, so I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to. All right, so there's either there's people who can it. Okay, let me use a little sports analogy here. All right, you have to remember the fundamentals, right? When you're looking for as one of your outsourced resources, it has to fill in the position that you're weak on, essentially. It has to be able to, you have to get that position filled in order to have a winning team. I mean, just like in any kind of sports team, you have to have good people in the correct positions, and yeah, you'll be successful. With and just like a sports star isn't good at everything, there are companies out there that try to outsource their services and say, hey, we can do everything. We can do everything that there is to know about marketing, content, web design. You throw it at us, we'll do it. A lot of times when you look at those companies, they're maybe okay at a lot of things, but they're not great at the thing that you need. With Composely, for example, we use Composely to write a lot of our articles for our newsletter that gets sent out every month, and we needed a outsourced service that could help us write those articles and to produce that newsletter. And Composely is very good at that. Their writers are incredibly good at taking ideas and topics that I give them and producing really quality content. And so for me, I think of it very strategically. What do I need filled, and which company is going to best, fill that position? Not necessarily. I don't necessarily want a do all be all type of company. I want my position filled so that we can, score and be the winning team. So that's how.
Oh, I love that analogy. I guess I'm thinking of basketball team, but that really works on almost any sports team. JC, Ashley, anything that you guys would add to that?
I think you really hit it on the mark there. I mean, yeah, you don't want someone coming in who's like, oh, I'm great at 7 things, or I'm okay at 7 things, but I'm great at none. And you're like, well, I need, it's like, that's wonderful. But at the same time, it really just goes down to understanding like your business needs, your team needs. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add there is, if you're assessing partners and trying to make sure that what you're getting, this is my budget, is this stuff good? You want to be sure you've got enough time to really evaluate it and to look for that sense of collaboration. Is this partner really trying to help you make good work? Do they understand your goals? Are you on the same team, to extend this metaphor, or are they just, here, you paid us for 500 words, here it is. Like, if you've got an open line of communication and they're asking for feedback, and does this meet your expectations? How can we improve? Those are the things that I would look for in a good partner that are going to reassure me. I think you also need some level of, I got to look this up. They can reassure me all they want, but if it's bad, then that's, so you got to set aside the time to look at it and really kind of measure it against your internal benchmarks. But those are the things I would look at.
That's super helpful. So we have about 10 minutes. So I will say, audience, please, if you have any questions, drop it in. We did get, Angela mentioned this earlier. We had it planned. I know we talked about it, but it's this 8,000 virtual elephant in pound. I'm not saying words cohesively. But this giant topic of AI, specifically in writing right now, and how it's impacting. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about how are you currently using AI in your role or other tools? Have you tested it out at all? And what have you seen with it? And JC, why don't you kick us off here?
Yes, absolutely. I was so glad someone asked as soon as we started. I was like, great. I was like, you all really want to know about this. Lovely. But yeah, it's such a huge topic right now. And I think a lot of people are really either so excited or so terrified. And personally, I think it's okay to sit. I think it's great, so, it is when we've got everybody jumps to the first thought of like, oh my God, this is going to take my job. And it's like, first of all, not today, not tomorrow. We don't know where everything's really more advantageous to look at it as a tool. These can be incredibly helpful. I've seen so many people using these tools in different ways. Obviously writing. I actually saw someone on LinkedIn earlier talking about how they were using it to help them. The really cool ways that we can use these tools, but they are just that, the tools. They're not the whole solution. I think it's really, really important to remember that, especially in creative fields, writing, design, things like that, that these chatbots, other AI tools, they're not coming with the creative process. They're really, using what they have and can find on the internet, and using what they can find, and bringing that all together and kind of like just squishing it together to create something. And there's a lot of considerations that go into that, plagiarism, copyright, all those fun things. But I think on a in a content marketing level, you take away the audience from that. You take away the really the human element from it, and you really take away the branding and really the experience that your brand has with your consumers. So I think those are all super, super, super important. But I think there is a way to utilize these tools in a way that's, really helpful for everyone. And Anne Handley has been covering this extensively in her content recently. And she really has this focus on that it is super important of who's using the tool, who's wielding the sword, who's doing it. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. What you give into it is what you get out of it. And I think with these tools, it's really, really important that we are, hyper specific. Like, we were talking, if a writer has to guess on something in the creative brief, it's the same process with AI, except now it's not a human guessing, it's a robot guessing. It's code guessing. And that can just be so much harder. It's definitely not going to make the right guess. And if it does, it's probably, 1 in a million chance.
Yeah. It's like, if you don't have time to write a good brief for your humans, do you really have enough time to write a good brief for the robot?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
No, that was so helpful. And I like that the Anne Handley is amazing, but who's wielding it, I think, is a really good thing to think through. Corey, have you guys tested it at all, or what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I mean, my thoughts is that it can be everything that JC said, really, but also just to add on to it, I think at the end of the day, AI is going to output data. That's what a robot does. It's just data. It's stuff that you can find, kind of condensed into one thing, and it's just going to output what it hears or what it sees or what it what's inputted into it. I think AI could be used very effectively in generating ideas for whenever you do want to make whenever you are creating, you could use AI as more of a support tool that can generate ideas for you and kind of help your brain. I mean, we've all probably had writer's block. With AI, you can kind of, dial that down a little bit, because if you're stuck on something, you can go into say one of the chat programs and put in your idea, and you can ask for ideas, and it'll give you all these different ideas. You can then extrapolate from what it suggests and maybe help your writer's block along and kind of move on to the next idea. So I think people, businesses shouldn't really worry about the robot overlord so much, as opposed to this is going to be a very helpful tool for professionals who need to create. It's going to be a very helpful tool in the creation process. So.
No, I like that. Both of you mention it as a tool, and I think that's a really good way to look at it. I think we have time for about one more question, but want to just kind of wrap up before, and then I'll let each of you kind of end with that for us. But one, thank you to our audience for joining. Thank you to our panelists. This has been an incredible discussion. I've been taking down some notes while you were talking, so absolutely amazing. For those of you who are still on the call, I am going to launch a quick poll. If you are interested, or, for those of the 40% of you that aren't using outsourced resources, if you're interested in talking to Composely, we would love to chat with you outside of this. So feel free to answer this poll. We'll connect with you afterwards. And then please connect with our amazing panelists. So I'm going to drop their LinkedIns in the chat. So please connect with them, follow up with any questions you have. Oh man, the LinkedIn copy, I'm gonna have to do it one by one, which is fine, but I will make sure to drop it in before we hop off here. So JC's is in the chat, and then I'll also include their LinkedIns in the follow-up email as well. So that way, if you want to connect with them, but they've been great resources. I've absolutely loved getting to hear their perspectives during this process. So make sure to continue following them. But for our panelists, I am curious, we talked about AI, it's a tool, but what are some of your thoughts about how it might impact like the next 5 years? And what are maybe some skills that the current marketer should start learning or wielding in their toolkit in order to kind of use this tool more effectively? And Ashley, I'll start with you.
It's so hard to know, because I don't know about y'all, I wasn't paying attention to AI very much before like Christmas. I got cornered at a holiday party. I was not trying to talk about, it wasn't a work party. I was like, what the heck? Somebody came out, what do you think about AI and content marketing? So I don't know how to see the future. I do think that this is a good time for people to kind of double down on understanding what their measures for content success look like. We often give writers the directive to try to be a better resource than what's already out there, which is not something that I think the robot understands. So I think we're going to have to wrap our brains around, what that looks like. I think we need to pay closer attention to how the search algorithms continue to evolve. Google just added an extra E onto EAT. Algorithms are, there's going to be AI content. Is it going to be ranked the same as human written content? I'm not sure. Is it going to be a better option for some types of content? Sure. If you're talking about medicine, money, like Google's probably still going to want that human expertise. So I think it's time to ask questions like that. And I think we'll see differentiations across industries. If I had to guess, we'll see, the emergence of more, medical reviewers, legal reviewers, financial reviewers, because we're going to have to double check stats and resources. I think it is going to change the editorial process a little bit. It's my best guess.
Absolutely.
Corey, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think when it comes to editing and kind of when it comes to review and watching out for plagiarism and things like that, I think it's going to be even more important to have experts on your team that can look at all the things that are being produced, and to make sure you're not, going against trademarks and IP and things like that. So I think it's going to be very important for marketing professionals, content professionals, SEO people. I mean, really anybody who's in charge of that kind of thing. I think it's going to be important to have those people on your team just so that you can review what's being generated by the AI. And also, I would add on, maybe you don't have to learn coding, but if you can understand coding, it'd be really, it kind of help you kind of understand how an AI gets its information and how things happen. So, I mean, you don't have to be a computer whiz, but just kind of just like in language, the basic syntax of how a computer speaks would probably be somewhat helpful, just so it can help you when you're reviewing your content. So,
JC, you want to wrap us up?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think Ashley is absolutely right. I think it will change the editorial process, but I think how is, the really big question. But I think that really just goes back on, relying on flexibility and, making sure more than anything, you include flexibility in your content strategy. I mean, of course, over the last few years, we've seen the huge need to be flexible. And I think this is just another area where that will continue.
Absolutely. Well, we are a few minutes over, so I'm going to wrap us up. But JC, Corey, Ashley, thank you all so much for the prep you did for this, for sharing your insights, sharing some of your tips. It was an absolutely fantastic discussion. I've dropped your LinkedIn in the chat. It'll also be available via the email. So please connect with our awesome panelists. I hope all of you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you.